on the end of her rod is called a gather. She's constantly turning at her fingertips because glass is super molten, and if she stops, gravity takes over and it wants to fall towards the earth. I can cut right through it. We can also stretch it all the way across the studio. Glass is super elastic when it's this molten, and as long as we had room to keep walking and Kwun had heat on her end, we could stretch this a little further, but we'll stop here. And we pulled that glass so far so quickly that it's already cooled down to room temperature. I don't normally think of glass as being super flexible, but when we pull it this thin, it feels kind of like fishing line. It does break to a point. It is still glass. And I'll leave some examples up at the front, but please do not take home any souvenirs because you can easily get splinters from this stuff. Okay. So this time, Kwun's gonna get some glass out of the furnace on a blowpipe, a hollow tube. She'll do the exact same thing. She's gonna gather a glass out of the furnace. And we'll add a few extra steps this time. So she's gonna walk over to the metal table in the corner of the studio there. It's called a marver table. It's made out of mild steel, but it used to be made out of marble, so that's where that name comes from. So she's selectively shaping and cooling the sides by rolling it on that steel table. So it creates kind of a little skin on the exterior because we're getting ready to add a bubble on the inside. So we've got our compressed air hooked up. There's our little bubble. And just for fun, we'll blow it up as big as we can. Okay, I think that's as far as we'll get it. Okay, so Kwun's gonna make a nice little mess on the baking tray there. I'm not gonna pick that up right away because I know it's a lot thicker than the string that we pulled. But in the meantime, so the marble we cut in the beginning looks like perfectly clear room temperature glass, but if I take this piece of paper, still hot enough to light it on fire. There we go. So we never blindly pick up anything off of the studio floor because it could potentially be well over 1,000 degrees. It's still pretty toasty. Not bad. All right. Again, don't normally think of glass as being very flexible, but when we get it this thin, we refer to it as cellophane glass because it takes on the properties of plastic more so than glass. And again, please do not try to take home any souvenirs because that is also some dangerous stuff. Okay. So we can get started making our object. So I'm going to get started on a blowpipe. And I'll go in, get some glass out of the furnace. And I'm not going to add a bubble right away. We've got some color out here on the marver table. So I'm going to dip my glass in this little gravy boat, and it's got some crushed up brown glass. And this is just a quick and easy way for us to add color. So the glass is hot enough that those particles just stick to the surface like sprinkles on ice cream. And between each layer, I'll go back to the reheating chamber to melt it in so I can get a little bit more on top. So I'll dip in one more time to make sure I've got a nice, solid, even coat of this brown. And once we have that all melted in, we can add our bubble. So I mentioned that we're making a sculptural object for y'all today. So for my demonstrations, I usually like to look up either what happened today in history or what national day it is, and today is National Apple Pie Day. So I'll be making a slice of apple pie out of glass. All right, so we are at the point where I'm ready to start shaping and cooling so we can add our bubble on the inside. We're still working with a solid mass of glass right now. So I've cooled down the sides a little bit. I'm going to use this big wooden ladle, it's called a block, to shape it up and continue to cool it down a little bit. Go ahead. So now that we have all this color on the surface, I'm just watching and waiting, and stop, for those sides to poof out and expand. And that lets me know that I've got a bubble on the inside. And I'm just going to cool it down a little bit further because this would make a very tiny, adorable slice of apple pie. But we're going to make a little bit larger object today. So I'm going to get some more glass out of the furnace here in just a second. And I have to wait for my glass to cool down for two reasons. Because if I have too molten glass on the end of my rod, I won't physically be able to gather more molten material on top of more molten material. But very importantly, I have a lot of color on this piece. And if I dip in the furnace right now, it's way too hot, and I could drip some of this brown glass into our nice pot of clear glass. And that would be bad news for everyone else that works here, because they would make everything clear with a little smear of brown for the next at least 2 weeks or so. So we'll let it cool down to a nice chilly 1,000 degrees, and it doesn't take very long. The glass is already nice and solid. So we'll go in for another layer of glass. And I don't need too much extra. I just really want to encase that brown glass in a little layer of clear, so I can drip the excess off into that bucket that we have on the floor. So any clear glass that's in that bucket or that gets recycled in our little break-off bins over there, we can actually throw back into the furnace to reuse at the end of the night. And anything with color we actually recycle through the city. Thank you. So the blocks are great. They're made out of cherry wood. And we use fruit woods for our tools because they have a high grain density and a low sap content. So the wood doesn't smoke up in our faces too much while we use them. And that high grain density allows for the wood to kind of withstand the heat of the glass a little bit better. But we keep them soaking in water 24/7. So as long as we're using our tools correctly, we should have those tools last a lifetime, so it shouldn't burn through the wood. So do a little bit of preliminary shaping. We'll start to inflate here in a moment. Okay. So we're going to start by making kind of a cone shape as like the general shape of our pie. Go ahead on. So the tool I'm using here, they're called jacks. They're essentially two knife blades hinged together. And keep going. I'm using them to make a little constriction line near the head of the pipe. And off. Because without that, we will not be able to get our piece off of our blowpipe. It's kind of like the lines on a chocolate bar where you might want to break off and share with someone. It just gives the glass a nice clear line of where we want it to break off. And I'll want to get this line nice and established before we do too much shaping. So I'm using a very fancy tool here to cool and shape our glass. It's just a wet wad of newspaper. And on, off. But the newspaper is one of my favorite tools because it's the closest I can get to touching the glass with my bare hands without actually burning myself. And now that we have that constriction line in there, we can start to shape up our pie a little bit more. So I'm going to heat mostly the bottom half of our bubble. because I don't want it to move around on that constriction line too much. I want a nice kind of stable basis to work from. So I'll hold this down a little bit, let gravity help me out. I think I'm going to squeeze this in a little bit smaller diameter, get it a little bit longer before we keep going. And I don't think we need the air anymore on this one. Because we're making a sculpture, I'm leaving the glass a little bit thicker than I normally would if I were making a cup or a vessel. But a lot of the steps that we are taking right now are very similar to how you'd start a cup or a vase. We're just turning it into pie instead. So I'm using the Marver table to kind of reinforce that cone shape. And then when I come out, I'll use gravity to kind of help me out and elongate our cone. Okay, I get this a little bit more established. Go ahead and take a little flash. So I'm going to give Kwun control of the blowpipe. I'm going to come outside of the bench with some cork paddles. So she'll turn for me while I squish it into more of a pie shape. And flip. And flip. And flip. And flip. Okay. All right, so we've got the general shape of our pie started. See, can you add just a little bit of air? Just a quick little, keep going. Keep going. And stop. So using the cork paddles, the top of our pie kind of caved in a little bit, which is not a big deal. Okay. All right. Do you want to get one gather on the small rod and do the tobacco, and we'll do the top of the crust? Okay, so we're going to be adding some extra glass to get our details of our pie sculpted in. So I'm just going to maintain the heat on this while Kwun's getting that ready. I don't really want this to move around too much anymore. So I'm just going to let it hang out in like the 1200 degree range. It's not really an exact science or exact temperature that I'm reading. It's just working with the material and kind of gauging how it's moving, what color it's glowing, kind of how hot that glass is. So Kwun's getting glass so we can add the little kind of frilly end of our crust. And the glass that she's preparing for that is what we would generically refer to as a bit of glass. And a bit is really any decorative element that we could add to our pieces. So in this case, it's the little frilly bit of the crust. But if we're making a vase or a cup, we could use it for a handle or really anything. So I'm going to get ready with my straight shears, which are very much like scissors you have at home. I'm going to grab Kwun's rod with my shears, drape the glass along the edge, give it a trim, and then I'll go to the reheating chamber just to give everything a nice quick little reheat. And I'll use my large pair of tweezers here to decorate the edge, make it look a little bit more like a pie. Okay. So I'm going to heat up the sides of our pie so we can indent it just a little bit. Because we're going to add some extra glass on the sides to make it look like there is apple pie filling kind of oozing out. So I'm using this handheld torch. It's very much the same as what we would use for flame working, just on a handheld scale rather than getting clamped down to that table. So I'm preheating this spot, and then I'm having Kwun take little reheats so that we can really work up the heat in that area quite a bit without getting the entire pie too hot. So when she takes those reheats, when she comes back, the section that we're heating up is glowing a lot brighter than everything else. Okay, so I'm going to take this metal spatula called a tag and start to push in on the sides. And we'll do this a few times. And I'm flipping back and forth here so that I don't let my pie get too off center. Okay. Thank you. So that should be good enough for that side. And we'll just do the same thing on the other. So now it'll look like we kind of have that little like top layer of crust sticking over the, or what's going to be the inside of the pie. Okay. Thank you. Let's see if this is warm enough. Almost. Okay. All right, we should be able to get it on this one. Thank you. There we go. Beautiful. All right, Kwun, if you want to go ahead and get the gathers for the filling on the inside. All right, so we're going to start to add the filling on the sides. So Kwun's going to get some more glass out of the furnace, and we've got two colors out on the table to try and mimic that apple pie filling color. So we've got a transparent yellow and a transparent amber. So hopefully it'll look like that nice gooey kind of caramelized apple on the inside. And while she's doing that, I can do a little bit of surface decoration. So I'm going to heat up the top of our pie. And I just want to get a little bit of texture in the surface. So I'm going to carve kind of those little holes where you'd let out steam. There we go. Right behind you. That one was really close. Yep, ready for you. Okay. So we're just going to drape that along the sides. Oop. And again, I'll take a quick little reheat. And I'm probably going to cut some of this off. So we don't need quite this much. Yeah, go ahead and start the other one. So I'm just going to take my straight shears and cut in to the glass that we just added. There we go. Right behind you again. Okay. So that glass is the freshest bit that we've added to our pie. And now I'm going to use my butter knife to carve in kind of little layers to make it mimic kind of those apples stacked on top of each other. Heat this up a little bit more. So all the colors that we're using are made of different metal oxides that are added to the raw materials of glass. Don't know all of the chemical makeups for all of them because we do buy our colors from different companies around the world that specialize in making glass color. But I do know that the yellow that we're using is usually made of cadmium. See, if I had blue glass, it's usually cobalt or copper. Okay, and I'll be ready when I sit down. If I add a precious metal like gold glass, it'll result in rubies and pinks. I think that's a much better amount this time. And because that's super fresh, I can just carve right in to our pie filling. And I'll melt in that sharp spot where we cut it off. Okay, so go ahead and flash, and I'm going to get ready to poke the hole. All right, so to finish this piece off, we're not quite done yet, so we're going to flip it around to another pipe. So I've got a little rod made of tungsten here. And I'm going to heat it up with this torch and get it nice and glowing red. And poke a hole in the bottom of our pie. See, we'll do that one more time just to be sure. So tungsten is one of the only metals that once it's heated, it doesn't stick to the glass. And I can drill right through and make a little hole. So while Kwun is keeping that nice and toasty, I'm going to get some more glass on a blowpipe. So we're going to flip this around to another hollow tube so we can continue to inflate it once we have it on the other rod. So I'll go in and get some glass out of the furnace. So I popped a bubble inside the furnace. And now I have a little pathway. So when we make this transfer, we have kind of a little tube that connects this pipe to the pie. And I'm going to use my tweezers to kind of pinch this into kind of like a little crown shape. And then I'll go on the inside with my jack blades to make sure that we have an open pathway. And then I'll blow some air through just to make sure that it hasn't closed off. So I'll heat it back up. It did close off when I did the shaping. That's not a big deal. Just let it warm up again and blow through. There we go. So we definitely don't want that tube to be closed off once we make this transfer. We're good to go now. So I'll get this nice and flat. And then I'll heat up just the face of our little tube here, because we want that to be nice and sticky and hot once we go to attach it to the bottom of the pie. But I don't want the rest of our transfer pipe to be moving around too much, because that'll make it difficult for Kwun once we make this transfer. Okay. So Kwun is going to take over the transfer pipe. I'm going to take control of the pie again. So I'm going to grab her pipe when she comes back over with my jack blades. We'll stick it hopefully right on center, right over the hole. Okay, so she's got it straight up and down. We're going to just squish and pull up just a tiny bit. There we go. And I'm going to start making a little constriction line right off of the end of the pipe. And we'll come down this way. How do you feel? Okay, so confirming with Kwun that she feels okay. Okay, so we're going to break our little pie off on our constriction line. And I'll open up a door for her because we're a little bit wider than we were with the other direction. I'll get rid of this pipe because we're all done with that. Just giving it a quick little reheat. And I'm going to start to work on closing off our pie here in a second. I'm just going to make sure that this is nice and set up here. Do you want to blow a little air in? We're just going to make sure that we didn't close off our... Okay. Making sure we didn't close off our little hole. And we may not necessarily need to add air, but I'm using this connection as opposed to a solid connection just in case we need to inflate it. You turn for me. So I'm going to start heating up the opening. And it shouldn't take too long. It's a little bit thinner where we just broke it off from the pipe. But I'm going to get that all heated up so that here in a moment we are going to close this off into a nice little point. Okay, go ahead and flash. Okay, we are nice and glowing, so I'm going to start to close down on our opening here. Go ahead and flash. And then I'll use my straight shears to just cut down that excess. And then we can use a little bit more glass on top to add some more filling and cover up where we just cut away. There we go. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to melt in that cut mark. And Kwun, do you want to do one more bit? We're just going to cover up with the same stuff. Okay. Okay. So we are almost there. So the transfer pipe that we use is referred to as a punty. It's named after the rod that it's made on. So in this case, this is a blown punty because we wanted to have the capability to potentially add air if we needed to. But usually the most common type of punty is made on a solid rod, and we would just flip it around so that we can continue working on the other side of our piece. And I don't need to do any more shaping as of yet. I'm going to wait until Kwun gets the glass ready so we can add some more filling and finish off our pie. Right behind you. So she looks like she's about ready. So I'm going to get ready with my diamond shears. And do you want to just heat that up and we'll do that to the other side. Okay, so we'll push that filling in a little bit more. Try to blend it in with the first one we put on. And then I'll go on the bottom with my butter knife just to make sure it sits a little bit more flat. Right behind you. Okay, so we got that last little bald spot to cover up. Okay. And we don't need very much glass for this. There we go. All right. Okay, so I'll take a quick little reheat and then I'll walk it around so you guys can get a little bit closer view. All right, so our slice of apple pie. So Kwun has disappeared to the back to put on some protective gear. So she's got a welder's jacket, a face shield, some Kevlar gloves because we are going to break this off of the pipe and into those Kevlar mitts. I'm just going to make sure that everything is nice and solidified before we go to break this off. So we don't want anything to be molten or moving once we go to put it away. And these colors are glowing pretty dark right now, and that's just because of how hot they are. So most colors don't look true to color when they're 1,000 degrees. Okay, so Kwun has preheated her gloves, because if she were to catch it with room temperature gloves, that's enough of a temperature difference to shock the glass. Give it a tap after dropping water on that little constriction line, and the vibration knocks it right off. And if you follow along on the screens, we've got a shot of our kiln room in the back where this is going to cool down nice and slow. All right. And it's pretty thick in some spots, so it'll probably take a few days to cool down. But big round of applause for Kwun for doing such an awesome job assisting. She'll be back in just a moment. Does anyone have any questions about what they saw today? Yes. It was an apple pie. Yes.